Okay, this is a redo of the pyramid illustration demo that I did in class. So according to Brightspace, our artboard size is always going to be 7 inches by 7 inches for any of our tracing assignments. I'm going to begin this with the template file that we created in class. And if you missed that part or don't have a template for the 7 inch by 7 inch artboard, refer to that tutorial video. It just saves you time and a little bit of headache when you start your project. So on the Mac OS, if I hit Command and Tab, it'll bring up my basically a list of all my open applications. I'm going to go to my Finder, and here is that template file that I created. And I've already created a folder and an assets folder for this assignment, like we talked about in class. So I'm just going to double click on this template file. And that'll open it right up. And you see it's an untitled document. So the first thing I'm going to do is save this file, save as, go into my tracing folder, and save this file before I start. So we're always naming our files. Last name, project, .ai. And by default, Adobe saves, Illustrator saves all of its files as .ai. .ai is the Illustrator file extension. And you can see that's down here. Don't save this document to the cloud, save it to your hard drive. And then make sure you back up to your backup medium at the end of every class. So current pyramid tracing, I'll say save. Notice also, just a note for Mac OS, that it's best if you don't place, you can place spaces between words in your file names, but either camel case them, meaning run them together with a capital letter separating words, or separate them with an underscore or a dash. It's just good practice. Not doing so on the Mac OS works out just fine, but I know on PCs sometimes they'll have a little bit of difficulty, and other operating systems will as well. You can share AI files with all sorts of people. So it's just a good best practice to be into. All right, so I'm going to save this file. Just accept the defaults, and we're ready to go. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to make sure, I'm going to change my workspace to make sure Essentials Classic is what we have. And I'm going to reset this just so that it's, if you're following along and trying to do it the same way I am, you've got all the same stuff available. So in Essentials Classic, for mine, properties, libraries, here's my layers menu. I'm actually going to click on this and drag it up here into the sidebar so that I have a little easier access to it and it's always available. So I'm going to place my scan to start with. I'm going to go to the File menu, Place, Command-Shift-P is the keyboard command for that, and go to my Assets folder where I already have my pyramid image. And make sure that when you're placing this object to trace in your file, you select template, because as you'll see in a moment, it's going to create it on its own layer and gray it out, which is good for while you're building out your artwork. So we're going to select template, say place, and you see it's grayed out and it's on the artboard. I can't move it around though, because if I look at here at my layers menu, here's that template layer and it's locked. So I'm going to do two things. I'm always naming my layers, so I'm just going to name this artwork. Don't leave them layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. Get into the habit of cleanly organizing your files. As you get into more complicated documents, it becomes ever more important to be able to quickly and easily find the layer you want to work on. Layers also help separate different elements of your artwork so you can lock them down while you're working on another element, and it reduces the possibility that you'll inadvertently click on something you didn't want to and move it. So get into the habit of naming your layers and creating layers. We're only going to have 2 layers here to start with, but let's get into the habit of doing that. So there's the first step. The second thing is I'm going to unlock my template layer, and I need to center this up on my artboard. So I'm going to hold down my shift key, click on the corner, and scale this up. Now, if I want it to be proportional but scale it up on the center, I can also tap the option key as well. And I'm just going to scale it up to about here. I want it to look nice on my artboard and not be crowding and cramming the edges. And then I really don't care that the exact center of this image is on the guide. What I want to do is center my artwork to the artboard. And as you can see, this pyramid is not centered inside of its document size. So I just need to move this over so that I'm going to place it so that the door of the cap is centered up, placed right over top of the center of this line. So if that's selected, I can either click on it, hold down my shift key and slide it across into place, or I can select that object and tap my arrow keys, left arrow key and right arrow key. You can move those around and get them kind of centered up. We're only using our scan as a guide to draw from, as a basic template. I guarantee as we go through here, you'll see that the shapes I build and that I center up won't match up to this exactly, but I need to start somewhere. So we're going to start with the template. So I've got this centered horizontally, and I'm just going to lock that back down. And this entire shape, we're talking class about breaking down objects. This entire shape is made up of nothing but 4-sided cubes. So rectangles, squares, you name it. So that's all we're really going to use. And from my toolbar, I'm just going to grab my rectangle, go to the artwork layer, and I'm going to lay down my first shape. Kind of like that. So we've got our first shape on the artboard. As I look at this, each of these subsequent shapes are exactly the same shape. It's just that they're a little bit longer. So I'm going to zoom in on this, and we're going to get this one right, and then we're going to duplicate it. We're going to copy and paste or duplicate to create all the other ones, and then just modify each resulting shape. So I've got my template layer. I can't see my shape behind. So if I hit Command Y on my keyboard, that shifts me to outline mode. And now all I'm seeing is the path that I'm working with and not the fill. Remember, everything we do, we want to have filled with black. We don't ever want for there to be a black stroke on any of this. So I'm just going to sort of square that up. And I've been using my selection tool. I'm going to switch now to my direct select tool, which is the white arrow. And if I come back over here to my shape and I click on only this corner, you'll see that it's solid, but the rest are empty. I can now click on that, hold down my shift key, because my shift key will always constrain my movements, horizontal, vertical, or 45 degrees. And I'm just going to slide that point over into place. Direct select allows me to select individual points within my shape. I can't do that with a regular selection tool. So direct select was important there. And now if I hit Command Y on my keyboard again, that goes back to preview mode, and I can see I've got my first shape. Pretty easy. So I'm going to go back to outline mode. And like I said, each of my resulting shapes, each of these additional shapes are the same. It's just that they're a little bit longer. They've all got the same angle at the end. I can draw them over and over again, but let's make life a little simpler on ourselves. Let's always try to work smarter and not harder, and always try to work a little faster. That comes with time. So I'm going to select my shape, and I can do one of two things. Edit, copy, edit, and I've got these different paste options. I'm going to do paste in front, and what that's going to do is paste a copy of that shape directly on top of the original. And then I'm just going to click on it, hold down my shift key, and slide that down into place. And then all I need to do now is move this out to this point. So I'm going to go back here to my direct select tool, the white arrow, and I'm going to click on this anchor point, hold down my shift key and click on this anchor point. And now I'm just going to slide those 2 points out. Pretty easy. Again, done. Command Y, I've got 2 of my shapes. I'm going to duplicate this again for the next one. I'm going to do this one differently though. So with my selection tool, I'm going to select this shape. And remember, keyboard commands do a lot of different things. With this shape selected, if I hold down the Option key and drag, it's going to duplicate my original shape. Undo that. So again, if I hold down my Option key and drag, it's going to duplicate that shape. If I hold down the Shift key, remember that's my constrain key, it's going to slide it straight down, and now I've made a duplicate. I didn't have to do the copy, paste in front thing. Either way works. One way is probably faster than the other, but as you get better and faster with the keyboard shortcuts, it all kind of becomes the same. So I'm going to select this point and this point, and I'm going to slide that over. And then I'm going to do this again. And I'm not going to go through the steps this time, but I'm just going to slide that down. Come over here, click just on the line this time and slide it across. All right, there. And if I Command Y, I have 1/2 of my pyramid created. Didn't take me too long either. So all of these shapes should be evenly distributed. If I look at these right now, the gaps between them seem to vary. This one and this one are pretty close, but this one is definitely narrower. Can you see that? So with my selection tool, I'm going to use my align tools to make sure, and distribute tools to make sure that these are organized. So if you don't have it up, I'm going to go up my window menu, go down, activate my align panel, slide this over here. And again, I went over this in class, but we can align to the left, center, and right, top, center, and bottom, and we can distribute as well. We can distribute in different ways though, based upon the align to options. So I'm going to align to, this first one's artboard. I'm going to align to selection. Select all of these, make sure selection, and I'm going to go to distribute objects, and I'm going to vertically distribute these on center. And if you watch, you should see them shift just a little bit. Okay, just a little, but they're evenly spaced now. That's my first side. Just for good measure, I'm going to make sure that I'm pretty confident that everything's aligned to the right-hand side, but I'm just going to go ahead and click this align, horizontal align right to make sure, and it is. And before I move on, I like to create my compound paths as I go. And again, we talked about compound paths in class, so I'm not going to rehash that. But with that selected, I'm going to go to the object menu, compound path, make. And pay attention, Command 8 is the key command for that. And I think from this point out, I'm going to use the key command because it's quicker. So make, and now that's a compound path. And if I go over here to my artwork in my layers panel, open that up, I can see that that shape is a compound path. I'll just try to open this out a little. Oop, wrong one. Open this out a little so I can see. There's a compound path. All right. So this side is simply a mirror of this side. So I'm going to use one of my transform tools, Reflect, to do that. And I'm always wanting everything to be, part of the reason I set up my guide is I always want everything to be centered on that guide. So I want to go over here to my tool panel, and my Essentials Classic set me up with the Advanced Tool palette, but you're looking for the Reflect tool. And actually, if you tap O, the letter O on your keyboard, that'll invoke that tool. All right, so I'm going to select that. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to select my shape here. And then I'm just going to tap O on my keyboard to get my Reflect tool. And I'm just going to place those crosshairs right over top of the middle of that. And if I hold down the Option key and click, it's going to bring up the dialog, but it's going to flip that directly along that center point that I set. So it's vertical, and if I just hit OK, it's simply going to flip my original. I want a copy of it. So I'm just going to click Copy, and there we go. So now I have two halves, and you can see in my artwork panel, or in my layers panel, there's my two compound paths. I'm just going to select the both of these. I'll do this one more time through the menu. Go to Compound Path, Make. And you see now those combined into one compound path. And I'm just going to center these up to the artboard just to be sure. And they were centered. So the next step is to do all my steps. I can do these using the tools that I've used thus far. I'm going to draw one of my shapes, one of my steps. I'm going to duplicate that the correct number of times. And I'm not going to worry about necessarily getting them all exactly on, because then I'm going to go back over here to my distribute tools like I did with my steps, and I'm going to evenly align all of those. So let's grab a rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw that out to match. Command Y. Looks like it's a little bit, I'm going to cheat it just there. Yeah. That kind of close. Remember, we're using it as a guide. So then I'm going to use my option, I'm going to use my duplicate function to create all these additional ones. So it's option, click, and drag. All right. I can select multiples. I can do 2 at a time. Option, select, click, drag. I can go ahead and select all 4 of these now and do that again. Anything I can think of to make it go a little bit quicker. And I'm going to assume that 4 kind of gets it. I just want to be sure that I've got the right number of steps here. And this would be our last one. I'm going to place my last one right where it's supposed to be. Let's, all right, so I've got my steps all created here. So I'm just going to select them. Again, I do this with my selection tool. If I click here and drag, I can select all those objects. And then I'm just going to go to my line panel, align to selection, and I'm going to distribute them. See, they shifted. And I'm going to make sure that they are aligned to the center of my artboard. Align to artboard, and I'm going to set those to center. There we go. And then last step is going to be, obviously I've got all my rectangles here. My last step is going to be, with all those selected, Command 8 creates a compound path. So I made a compound path out of that. I've got this compound path. Select these both. And I've got my line panel up here. I'm going to make sure that everybody is aligned to this artboard on center. And Command 8 again, and create another compound path. So I'm most of the way there. Last step is to create the little house on top. And you can see that there's something different going on here, which we haven't discussed yet, but we will. And that is that, again, this is just a rectangle, and these windows and the door are just rectangles as well. It's just that these 3 rectangles are cut out of this one. So when I brought up my line tools, you see that there's another tab here called Pathfinders, and I can use these to create those shapes. And basically what I'm going to do, the process is going to be, I'm going to draw the bottom shape, which is my overall house. And then I'm going to draw each one of these additional shapes. And actually I'm going to draw one and duplicate it and resize it. I'm going to kind of distribute those to make sure they're centered before I do anything. So I'm going to draw the building itself, and then I'm going to draw the doorway, and I'm going to use the Pathfinder that allows me to subtract the top object from the bottom back, the front object from the back object, or the top object from the back object. But whenever I do that, I want to make sure I draw that bigger than the shape I'm cutting out of. If I try to go right on this line, I'm going to get weird. I could get weird stuff. So I'm going to try to drag this beyond, just like that. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other two. Well, I'll do the same thing for the other two windows here in a moment. So I've got this and I've got this. Let's select those both. I'm going to go to my align tools, make sure they're centered on my artboard. Align to artboard, center. And then back to my Pathfinders, and the second one is minus front. And that's the one that I'm going to use. So I do want to point out that minus front means that anything that's on top will be cut out of anything that's in the back. And I can tell my doorway is my tall rectangle, and the house itself is my long rectangle. So I can see in my layers panel that these are in the correct order. So each of those selected, minus front. And now if I do Command Y on my keyboard again, you see it's cut out. And then I'm going to draw these side windows and do the same thing with those. So one thing that I want to point out is, if you've noticed, as I've been working, when my cursor goes over top of a shape, you'll see that I get a little tip. My cursor is right over top of a path here, right over top of an anchor point here. If I go, and the presence of these little notes are referred to as smart guides. And if I look under my view menu, go down here a little below halfway, smart guides is checked, and it's Command U. It's worth getting to know that keyboard command, Command U, because you can toggle them on and off. And sometimes there's it's desirable to be able to do that. So I'm using smart guides. And what this is going to tell me is I'm going to create my next rectangle. And I'm just going to kind of start down here and draw it. And it's going to kind of snap right to that point. And then I'm just going to drag that over like that. And I want to make a copy of this on this side, but I want it to be spaced correctly. So I'm going to use this reflect tool again, just like I did for these shapes down here. So I'm going to go select my reflect tool, or O on my keyboard. I've got that shape selected. Hold down on my option key and put my cursor right on my guide and click. You see that it duplicates it right to the other side. Make a copy of it. And I'm going to do this a certain way so I can show you what happens when things are out of order. So both these thin rectangles are on top of our house. I'm going to start with this one. I'm going to select the house. I'm going to select this rectangle. And I'm going to do minus front. And pay attention to what happens on my path here. Anytime I do any of these commands, it creates the new resulting shape at the very top of my hierarchy. So I'm going to do minus front there. No, it did not. It actually took the place of, that makes sense. I was wrong. It made, this new resulting shape took the place of the original top object. So I've got this selected, and now I can select this one, and I can do minus front again. Command Y, zoom out. And now I can select each of these objects. Select this top object, hold down my shift key, select the bottom compound path, go back to my align panel. I'm going to align to artboard and center it, make sure it's all centered, and it is. And then I'm going to make a compound path out of all of that. When we're done, our final object should be a single compound path, just like this. And that's the case with all of our tracings. So I've got that. I'm going to turn off my scan layer just so it's nice and clean. And I'm just going to center this up on the artboard for nice organized presentation. So align to artboard. I already know it's centered horizontally, but then I'm going to center it vertically. You see it shifted up just a little bit. My object overall is square centered on my artboard. And before I turn this in, what I'm going to do is select this. I'm going to delete this template layer. So I'm going to select that layer, go down here to the bottom, delete the selection. Yes. I have one layer. I'm just going to lock it just so I can't move it around inadvertently, and save my document. And that's the file that I'm going to upload. You can upload this .ai file directly to Brightspace.